Part 4. Last time we learned about him going against the school that he was a part of, a school that he found to be backwards, mostly in ideology, which was even worse than the poor conditions and stuff that it was in. It barred students from reading Marxism Leninism, but they studied it anyway. And then he came to be dissatisfied with the way both the communist and the nationalist movement were going. So him and his comrades formed the Down with Imperialism Union. That's what we heard last time. Now we're on part 4 of this chapter, my mind turning towards a new theater of activity. Hwasong Yusik School experienced many difficulties. Jesus fucking Christ! Fuck the warning system in here. Jesus, something about what it startled me so much I couldn't even read it. I fucking closed it before I could even read it because it startled me so fucking bad. Good God. Say, somebody's missing 2 provinces away, probably. Actually, it's probably something to do with the fire around here, but oh well, too late now. Scared the shit out of me and I closed it. Jesus. It's ridiculous. Alright, let me try that again. Hey, Bugga. Bugga's on the lookout now. Hey, Bugga. Look, she's on the lookout now. You keep a high appraisal of everything, Bug. You keep an eye out for the fires, okay? Alright, she says she will. Alright, Comrade Kim Il-sung, part 4. My mind turning towards a new theater of activity. Hwasong Yusik School experienced many difficulties because of a shortage of funds. There were less than 100 students at this school, but given the circumstances of the Independence Army at the time, it was not easy to provide for even this number of students. Although Jung Kwok-bu was in charge of the school, it was unable to provide sufficient money. Jung Kwok-bu had 3 departments in charge of the administration, the military, and civil affairs, and was barely maintaining the existence of was barely maintaining its existence with funds collected from people penny by penny. Therefore, it was in no position to provide large sums of money for the school. In order to solve difficulties caused by the lack of funds, the authorities of Hwasong Yusik School mobilized its students from time to time to collect funds. The students formed groups, each consisting of 20 people. They returned to the companies from where they had come, received weapons, and collected funds while traveling for 2 months around the districts under the jurisdictions of Jung Kwok-bu. And, when their scheduled time was over, left with other groups taking their turn. The money they collected in this way was all used up within a few months. So they, again, had to go to Jilin to request Jung Kwok-bu for aid. Once headmaster Ko Tong-o sent the school superintendent to the headquarters of Jung Kwok-bu to obtain the money that would be needed for winter. However, the school superintendent returned empty-handed, cursing the commander of the 3rd Company. He said that the 3rd Company commander had taken the money intended for Hwasong Yusik School and used it for his wedding. It was said that the company commander had spent the money like water in order to treat all his neighbors to food and drink, over several days. Some food had remained even after that, so he had even invited people from the neighboring village to celebrate with him. I could not repress my indignation when I heard this. The money in the coffers of Jungwoo had not fallen from the sky. It was money contributed as war funds by the people in tiny amounts to regain their lost country, even though they themselves lived on gruel and sometimes missed meals. They had no money. Our people contributed to the war fund even by making straw sandals and selling them. Only then could they feel at ease. The commander of the third company seemed to think nothing of this. He must have been completely blinded by self-interest to have, as company commander, resorted to such mean deception. The fact that a commander, whose mission it was to fight a bloody battle against the enemy, felt no compunction in committing such misappropriation was proof that the highest circles of the Independence Army were degenerating. It is said that, following the USA Treaty, the commander of the Volunteers Army, upon hearing of the defeat of the volunteers under the command of Cho Ik-sun in Suncheon, gathered hundreds of volunteers and conducted vigorous activities in Jeolla province. Upon hearing that his men had robbed some people of their household effects, he, having lamented the fact, disbanded his unit and hid in the mountains. From this, we can see that the commander regarded an infringement upon the interests of the people as a great shame and a crime. The misdeed of the commander of the third company could be considered, in the final analysis, to be an encroachment on the interests of the people. When I was living in Linjiang, some soldiers of the Independence Army became to talk to the town because they had gone to Korea and taken a cow from some peasants. The commander of the unit, to which these soldiers belonged, once visited our home and was sharply reproved by my father. In those days, when soldiers of the Independence Army appeared in areas where Koreans were living in order to collect funds, those in charge of the districts had a document circulated around the settlement in which they had written an amount of money or rice which each household was to contribute. The residents had to contribute funds as was noted in the document. This was a heavy burden on the poor families. Nevertheless, the soldiers of the Independence Army disregarded the people's poverty and simply tried every possible means to extract as much as possible. Groups with different districts under their control fought to expand them. Some soldiers of the Independence Army forced men from other armed units into giving them the money they had collected and then taking to their heels. Members of large and small armed units vied with one another to squeeze money from the people. They regarded the people as mere taxpayers and attendants who should provide them with money, grain, and bedding. Such misdeeds were no better than those of the bureaucrats in the former feudal society. Sitting in palaces with jeweled crowns on their heads, the feudal rulers of Korea constantly enacted new tax laws to bleed the people white and keep their purses empty. At one time, the feudal government used colossal sums to build the Gyeongbok Palace, and with a view to compensating for this, they even invented a door tax, a travel tax. If they had built universities and factories with the money they obtained in this way, they would have at least been thanked by posterity. The progressive young people in the Hwasong Yusik School deplored the fact that the Independence Army seemed to be going to ruin, with the company commander having degenerated to such an extent. However, they simply blamed and deplored him. In the bright society we have now, the army and the people would have gathered public support and taken him to court or tried the case among themselves to force him to break his bad habit. However, nothing could be done in those days when there was no law and military discipline was not rigid. True, there was an organization under Jung Woo-bu in charge of the civil cases. However, it existed only in name. Before it, they brought only those people who could not contribute sufficient funds, and they were beaten on the hips. They connived at such illegal acts as that committed by the company commander. Their law had a loophole through which the higher circles could slip. With this event as the impetus, I resolved to give a serious warning to the soldiers of the Independence Army and to all the fighters for independence. However, the problem was how to do so. Ko Kang-gol proposed that we select representatives of the students and protest against it by visiting all the companies from the 1st to the 6th. Some people suggested that they should expose the bureaucratic acts of the soldiers of the Independence Army by having an article published in the periodical, such as Tangdong Minbu, issued by Jung Woo-bu. It would have been good to do so. The problem was, however, with whether the headquarters at Jung Woo-bu, the commanders of other companies, and the members of the editorial department of the said publication, who were little different from the commander of the third company, would accept the article. I propose that we write a letter of protest to all the companies of the Independence Army instead of attempting methods about which we were undecided. The others supported my proposal and asked me to write the letter of protest. That letter of protest was the first criticism we offered of the Nationalists, following the formation of the Down with Imperialism Union. It was the first time for me to write a letter of protest. It seemed to me that in it I failed to include everything I wanted to say. However, my comrades told me it was good, so I gave it to Kim Il-soo, and asked him to convey it to the correspondent from Jung Woo-bu when he came. The letter of protest was quickly conveyed to all the companies by the correspondent. There was a big response to the letter. Even Oh Tung-jing, who was intolerant of anything that hurt his pride, censured Jung Woo-bu. Not to mention the man who had used the war funds for his wedding appeared to have been shocked by the letter. At the beginning of the following year, when I was studying in Jilin, Oh Tung-jin spoke of the letter of protest to me. He said that he had read it with the company commanders and platoon leaders, who had gathered there where the 6th Company was stationed. He said, "Having read your letter of protest, I sharply reproved the 3rd Company commander. I even thought of removing him from his post. Such people give shame on the Independence Army." Although he frankly admitted that the highest circles of the Independence Army were degenerating, Oh Tung-jing was indignant and irritated over the fact that he was unable to save the situation. I wonder how Oh Tung-jing managed to appease his fiery temper when he had to remain an onlooker to the corruption of the Independence Army, unable to check even what he saw with his own eyes and felt keenly. As I listened to Oh Tung-jing, I realized that the depravity of the Independence Army was a source of anguish, not only for the younger generation, but also for conscientious nationalists. However, it was scarcely possible to arrest the political and moral depravity of the Independence Army with one letter of protest. The Independence Army was headed towards irretrievable decline. The fate of the Independence Army, Nationalist Army to defend and represent the interests of the property class, could not be otherwise. The students of Hwasong Yusuk School were little different from the soldiers of the Independence Army when it came to treating the people rudely and imposing economic burdens that were too heavy on them. When they were mobilized to collect contributions, they, too, collected the people's property and provisions on a rival basis in the districts under their control. Those families who did not readily contribute were forced to give them animals, such as pigs or chickens. With these families, they either claimed that they lacked patriotism or found fault with them without good reason by saying, for instance, that they did not support the Independence Army. They even complained about the meals served at the school, saying that they were continually given cooked millet and that the non-staple foods were not good enough, and so on. Once, at supper, a student complained that only cooked millet and a soup of dried vegetable leaves were served at the dormitory's dining room. In the end, he even quarreled with Hwang Si-il, the inspector of the dining room. Hwang Si-il took his duties very seriously. However, the student said that the inspector was not doing his job properly, even if the quality of the meals was only a little below standard. Following the country's liberation, I once met Hwang Si-il, who was working as a vice chairman in the Uji County People's Committee, and we recollected our days at the Hwasong Yusuk School. Then he told me that when he visited the village, he never complained about the meals, remembering the lesson that he had learned during his days at that school. I believe those who complained about cooked millet at the Hwasong Yusuk School would also complain about the meals when they returned to the Independence Army after graduating. I also thought that such people would, in the end, be reduced to despicable creatures who knew nothing but money and power. The problem was that, in 2 years, such people were to command the companies and platoons of the Independence Army. Nothing could be expected from soldiers who were not ready, even to live on cooked millet, let alone die of starvation. Disappointment at the nationalist movement as a whole, centering around the Independence Army, as well as the disillusionment. Yeah, RT. Cooked millet, Chad. They're basically eating birdseed. Consider this significant. And I mean, he really spells it out right here to repeat this part, right? Nothing could be expected from soldiers who were not ready even to live on cooked millet, let alone die of starvation. So he's saying, if you want to be an Independence Army soldier, you have to be ready to die of starvation. That's a part of the job. If you're not ready for that, how could you ever be an Independence Army soldier? Disappointment at the nationalist movement as a whole, centered around the Independence Army, as well as disillusion in education at the Hwasong Yusuk School, grew in my mind with the passage of time. Hwasong Yusuk School did not meet my expectations, and I could not fulfill the expectations of the school. As Hwasong Yusuk School could not meet my desire, so I could not be the student for which Hwasong Yusuk School hoped. My discontent with Hwasong Yusuk School and the dissatisfaction of the school with me were in direct proportion to each other. The more I loved the progressive idea of Marxism-Leninism, the more I shunned the education provided at Hwasong Yusuk School. And the more I rejected the education of the school, the more I felt in agony. I feared that staying away from the school would mean betraying the trust of those who had sent me there, and going against the will of my father, who had asked them to look after me. I felt terribly sorry at the thought of Oh Tuk-jin, who had quickly covered hundreds of miles to attend my father's funeral and consoled me, and urged me to go to the school, even when pushing travel money into my pocket, as well as Kim Si-oo, who had poured me liquor to welcome me on my arrival at the school, of Cho Tong-o and Kang Ji-ha. If I was to remain loyal to them, I had to take an interest in the education provided at Hwasong Yusik School, even though I was disillusioned with it. I could save my face before them by studying for 2 years, shutting my eyes to everything and meekly serving the Independence Army in the company to which I would be appointed. The trouble was, not that I would be unable to study with the current of thought, or solidify the foundation of the Down with Imperialism Union if I served in the Independence Army. It was inconceivable for me, however, for the sake of saving my face, to get along politely and diplomatically, being given education which I considered to be conservative. I did not want to compromise with the outdated education in such a manner. So, what should I do? Should I return home as the head of a household, taking over the surgery from my uncle? Or should I go to the city, Shenyang, or Harbin, or Jilin, and go to a higher school? After these complicated thoughts, I resolved to leave Hwasong Yusik School and go to Jilin to attend secondary school. I chose Jilin as my next stop after Hudian because this city was an important political center of Manchuria, where many anti-Japanese fighters for independence and Korean communists gathered. For this reason, Jilin was even called the Second Shanghai. In China, Shanghai was the assembly place of the Korean revolutionaries. I wanted to break out of the narrow enclosure of Hudian and set up in a broader area, launching the communist movement, which had taken its first step with the formation of the Down with Imperialism Union, on a higher stage, and conducting it on a full scale. This was the main reason why I left Hwasong Yusik School. Going to Jilin after attending Hwasong Yusik School for only 6 months was the first great and courageous decision in my life. My second courageous decision was to set fire to a bundle of documents accusing those who were allegedly affiliated to the pro-Japanese organization called Minsing Yeongdang, when I was forming a new division following the Nantao meeting. Even now, I think that it was right for me at that time to make the courageous decision to leave Hwasong Yusik School and go to Jilin to mix with other young people and students. If I had stayed at Hwasong Yusik School, all the processes, which later helped to lead the Korean Revolution to a rapid upsurge, would have been delayed. The members of the Down with Imperialism Union were surprised to hear of my intention to leave the school and go to Jilin. I told them, now that we have formed the Down with Imperialism Union, we should extend its organization and idea far and wide. It seems that I can do nothing by remaining here. I think there will be no great benefit for me in remaining at this school. After I leave, you should take advantage of your opportunities also, and establish yourselves either in the units of the Independence Army or in some appropriate place, and go among the masses, spreading the line of the Down with Imperialism Union. Because you are all members of it, you must receive unified leadership from the organization no matter where you may be working. I agreed with some of my comrades to meet later in Jilin. I had already discussed with Kim Si-oo the matter of leaving Hwasong Yusik School. I confessed to him. I will consult with my family too. However, I don't find Hwasong Yusik School much to my liking. Although I have no money, I would like to go to Jilin and attend secondary school. Could I ask your opinion? The area controller expressed great sorrow. Nevertheless, he did not try to stop me from leaving the school. He said, "If this is your intention, I will talk over the matter with my friends and use my good offices on your behalf. Each man has a favorite cart. If you don't like the Hwasong Yusik School cart, ride in your own." It felt much easier in my mind because Kim Soo-woo, who had been so delighted at my coming to Hwasong Yusik School and welcomed me, understood me. He told me to pay courteous respects to Headmaster Cho Tong-o, so that he would not be sorry at my leaving the school. He also asked me to call on him, without fail, on my way to Jilin, after seeing my mother. Winning Kim Soo-woo's consent was easier than I had expected. However, parting with Headmaster Cho Tong-o was accompanied by unbearable agony. At first, he was angry and criticized me for a good while. He stormed at me, saying, "Once you, a man, have resolved to do something, you must see it through. It is unreasonable for you to leave the school in mid-course. You say you are leaving because you do not like the education here? Where is there in this uncertain world a school that can be to everybody's liking?" Then he turned his back on me and looked out the window. Thus he stood looking vacantly at the sky from which snow was falling. If this school is not to the liking of such talented students as you, Songju, I, too, will leave. At these words spat out by the headmaster, I was not nonplussed. Not knowing what to do with myself, I wondered if I had been too cruel in criticizing the education being given at the school in front of its headmaster. After a while, Cho Tong-o calmed down and approached me, placing his hand on my shoulder. He said, "I will not oppose any ism, be it nationalism or communism, if it aims at winning the independence of Korea. Anyhow, I wish you success." Even after we had gone out into the playground, the headmaster said,
"Feed the children gets my support."
"Damn right, RT." Even after we had gone out into the playground, the headmaster said many fine things to me, things which would serve as a lesson for me. Snow fell continually on his head and shoulders. Afterwards, whenever I recollected how the headmaster had seen me off in the heavy snow, I repented of my failure to brush the snow off his shoulders. 30 years later, Cho Tong-o and I had a chance, emotional meeting in Pyongyang. I was the premier, and he was the cadre of the Consultative Council of the former South Korean politicians in the North for the promotion of peaceful reunification. However, that meeting was simply a meeting between teacher and pupil. The idea behind the Down with Imperialism Union, which had been put forward in Hudian, was blossoming in socialism in this land, which had emerged victorious from the ordeals of war. "So, Premier Songju, you were right at that time." As he smilingly spoke my childhood name, my mind traveled back to the playground at the Hwasong Yusik School a few decades before, on the day when snow was falling. The old teacher, who had spent his whole life amid complicated political upheavals, appreciated my leaving Hwasong Yusik School 30 years ago, with this short remark, with no explanation or commentary. My mother also supported me in leaving Hwasong Yusik School. Jesus Christ almighty. Oh, evacuation orders. Muscadava and... Oh, okay, they're evacuating people. Not that far from me. Not me yet. Not me yet. But not that far, also. That's what I couldn't read in time last time. It is evacuation orders. I don't come to your stream as often as I do Dave or Mule because you make me cringe so fucking hard at my former ignorance. Oh my god. My other streamer favorites are Intellectual Burgers, You're in My Vegetables. Well, thank you, comrade. But, don't ever feel, don't ever feel because like my thing is like, it's not about where you've been or even how long it takes. It's about, where you're headed. That's the thing for me. That's what matters. Just like with a country. There's wildfires, Sam. Thoughts and prayers. Thoughts and prayers. I think I do have some N95s around. Yeah. I'm inside right now where I've got filtered air in here. I just gotta I just gotta keep an eye out on these alerts because now this one is saying, like I said, this one is not that far. This alert is somewhat like, oh shit. All right, I'll continue. I'll continue before I have to fucking leave or something. Oh, we only got a couple pages here actually. Okay, he said, my mother also supported me in leaving Hwasong Yusuk School. When she first heard of it, she looked very grave. However, when I told her the reason for leaving the school, it put her mind at rest. She said, you were always worried about your school fees. A man can do nothing if a lack of money deprives him of his vitality. I will provide your school means by all means. I only want you to achieve your aim. Now that you have resolved to follow a new path, be bold. What my mother said was a great encouragement to me in my fresh ambition. In Fusong, I discovered that many of my schoolmates were still there, having been unable to go to higher school because of their strained family circumstances, and that they were at a loss. Not knowing what course to take, I decided to awaken them ideologically and lead them along the road of revolution. I was impatient to do something, with the DIU having just been formed, and I decided to spread its roots in all directions. I formed the Senal Children's Union of patriotic children in and around Fusong to educate them in the progressive ideas and lead them on the road of revolution. I formed the union on December 15th, 1926. It was a communist organization for children, the aim of which was to fight for the bright new day when Japanese imperialism would be overthrown and national liberation achieved. The day when the old society would be destroyed and a new one built. The formation of the Senal Children's Union marked an important event in extending the activities of the DIU. The slogans put up by the Children's Union were truly impressive. We put up the slogan, let us fight to achieve Korea's liberation and independence. And for this purpose, some immediate tasks, such as that of studying new progressive ideas and explaining and disseminating them among broad sections of the masses. I defined the organizational principles and a work system for it. To carry out its tasks, as well as a daily routine for its members, and gave them guidance in their union life before I left for Jilin. I helped my mother to form the Anti-Japanese Women's Association on December 26, 1926. On the basis of independence on the basis of the experience I had gained in forming the DIU and the Senal Children's Union. After my father's death, my mother embarked on an energetic revolutionary struggle. In those days, my mother organized evening classes in the Fusong County Hall, in the rural areas around it. She taught Korean women how to read and write, and gave them revolutionary education. I visited Kim Su-u in Hudian and had promised on my way to Jilin after my short stay in Fusang. Kim Su-u gave me a letter addressed to Kim Sa-hun, saying that Kim Sa-hun had been a close friend of my father. It was a letter of introduction in which he asked him to have me accepted at a school when I arrived there. That was my last meeting with Kim Su-u. Kim Su-u was someone whom I shall always remember and who left a deep impression on me. He was a taciturn, but did much work for national liberation. He took part in the enlightenment of people, the education of the younger generations, the purchase of weapons, fundraising, guiding political workers, and to and from the homeland, the conveyance of secret materials and information, and the amalgamation of the armed organizations and their cooperation. There were almost no fields in which he had no hand. He not only helped my father in his work, but also gave me sincere support in my work. It was Kim Si-u who kept watch on the day when we formed the DIU, and who was most delighted at the event. After our parting, he continued to study the Independence Army with food. He continued to supply the Independence Army with food grain and aided Korean students enthusiastically, while continuing to run the Yongfeng rice mill. During the Civil War in China, he, as chairman,
is what's happening on this planet, y'all.
As chairman of the Aid the Revolution Association, he took great pains to protect Korean people's lives and property from the attacks by the Japanese and Jiang Jiexi's army in Hudian. He had returned to the homeland in 1958. Although he had worked hard for the nation all his life, he never mentioned the fact. So I did not discover his whereabouts. He became seriously ill in Juntan, and only when he had just a few days to live did he tell his children about his relations with my father and me. His children were surprised to hear the story. They said to him, "Why did you never visit the general if you knew him so well? How glad the general would be to meet you, father. The general is currently giving field guidance in Juntan. Even now, it is not too late. We must invite him to our house, as you cannot move." It was true that at that time I was giving field guidance in Junkan County. Having listened to them, he chided them. "It is not for your benefit that I tell you this old story just before I die. It is the history of our family, and you should be faithful to him and fully support him. We should not keep him away from our state affairs even for a moment, should we?" The old man had been stout-hearted in this way for many years. If he had acted as his children had told him, he would have met me. I was very sorry. My failure to meet him again is one of the greatest regrets of my life. Whenever I recall my days at Hwasong Yusik School and the DIU, I am reminded of Kim Si-u. I cannot speak about my Hudian days without mentioning Kim Si-u, who made quiet, persistent effort to help me in those unforgettable days when we disseminated the new ideas and formed the Down with Imperialism Union. The DIU grew to become invincible, owing to the positive support of Kim Si-u and other honest people. Bearing the hope of those people in mind, I left for Jilin with a great ambition and a great determination. That brings us to the end of this part. This part brings us to the end of this part. And next we'll be on part 5. Ri Kwan Rin, heroine of the Independence Army.